Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the second part thereof for today, the 15th of August 2025. There's a lot going on at the moment with regard to, obviously, Alaska and the peace negotiations, the meeting between Putin and Trump. I'm not going to be talking about that, obviously, in this video. This video is about military aid. I may have time to do a geopolitical update tonight or today. I have an awful lot stacked up ready to go in that domain. I would like to do a live and just expunge, purge myself of all of those tidbits to get them out there. So I may do that later. It just depends. Okay, we're going to start. And by the way, I'm exceptionally tired. I haven't slept for like however long, almost 2 days or something. I don't know. Too long. So if I don't make much sense, I apologise. That's the way it goes. Back from the whole hollybobs today. Right. The European Commission has announced the receipt of a third tranche of 1.6 billion euros from frozen Russian assets. Frozen central bank assets, says Max 25. The funds will be directed to support Ukraine, 95% through the Ukraine Loan Cooperation Mechanism, 5% through the European Peace Fund. And we also hear that Ukraine has secured a record $586 million from an EBRD loan. So that's a development bank for the European Union to shore up low gas reserves. The financing will help Ukraine better prepare for the autumn and winter months as the country's gas storage reserves fall to their lowest level in the last 11 years due to Russian attacks. We've also heard that the water levels in Ukraine, are particularly low, and that is affecting hydroelectric power output going forward. So some challenges in the energy sector for Ukraine. Now, Zelensky said, I spoke with Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson this year. Sweden has allocated $4 billion to help our defence. I'm pinging all over the shop, better stop that. Sweden, like all the Nordic countries, firmly supports the need for the quickest possible, just and reliable end to the war, as well as effective pressure on Russia. Now, we hear that obviously Sweden is helping Ukraine a lot here. We're hearing various things concerning different countries paying for American military aid goods for European countries. So Germany's doing this, but I think also some Nordic countries and maybe other nations are getting together too. We're going to go to Germany first, though. Germany will provide Ukraine with a $500 million military aid package under NATO's new PURL initiative, funding US supplied equipment and ammunition. So that's the mechanism whereby they can buy stuff quickly from the US. So here's German Aid to Ukraine talking about this a day ago. The German MOD just announced via their WhatsApp channel that Germany will contribute to one of the first comprehensive aid packages worth up to $500 million. Germany will therefore contribute to the package so far jointly funded by Denmark, Norway and Sweden, which was announced a week ago. So not quite sure of who is contributing what, but we do have some detail from I think do we have other details elsewhere from German Aid to Ukraine? I'm not sure, but anyway, that's good news. Update: the German Foreign Office just confirmed to me, says German Aid to Ukraine, that the German government is indeed financing an entire $500 million package. So that is entirely through Germany, through the PURL mechanism to assist Ukraine, with European partners and Canada financing additional packages. Right, that's it. So we also have Latvia to contribute 2.3 million. Why am I pinging so much? Apologies about the pinging. Right, okay. The Baltic nation of Latvia is to contribute $2.3 million to NATO's initiative to supply Ukraine with US weapons, just like we've been talking about. This is the PURL, the Priority Ukraine Requirements List. So the US just puts out a list of stuff that they're willing to sell. Of course, Trump has been bragging that they are not paying any more to Ukraine, that Europe's paying everything, or other nations are paying everything, NATO's paying everything. And bragging that other people are picking up the list, which I suppose he can brag about. I don't know. It's just bragging about not being particularly I think, morally or politically savvy. I just have a real big issue with that, particularly as he keeps lying about the amount of money that the US has given in military aid to Ukraine versus what Europe has given, and keeps getting it the wrong way round. You got Scott Bessent as well saying that Europe need to step up. It's like Europe has stepped up double what the US has given in aid. So it's really frustrating. We keep hearing the same tired old lies. But anyway, the PURL is that system whereby other nations can buy American stuff. And American, are laughing all the way to the bank, I guess. A military aid transport from the United States, though, is noticeably increasing, says Visioner. So for the past 2 weeks, Ukrainian Ruslans, so planes, have been in the air almost daily. Right now, one is en route to Poland, another is heading to Leipzig, before continuing on to the US, and the third is likely operating a commercial flight from Estonia to Chile. In addition to these 3 Ruslans, several US Air Force Globemasters are also in the air. So who knows what the provenance of this aid might be, whether it's entirely stuff that's being bought, whether it's still USAI funded equipment that is due to hit Ukraine that is remaining. I don't know, or even some of the presidential drawdown authority that might still be due to be delivered. I don't know, but there are planes in the air, and it appears that there are quite a few as well. Right, European defence plants are growing 3 times faster amid Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, says the Financial Times. They've identified 7 million square metres of new industrial development after tracking changes at 150 facilities. So these are manufacturing facilities across 37 companies across Europe, namely those associated with ammunition and missile production. So European defence plants have been really doing a good job. There's been a lot of talk about Europe being very slow off the mark to ramp up defence production, but it is often likened to turning a tanker, and it does appear that Europe is, at least to some degree, getting there. Well, let's look at a couple of examples of this. So in 2025, Ukraine received 1 million large caliber shells from the Czech Republic, all part of the Czech ammunition initiative Prime Minister Petr Fiala has announced. Now, although this isn't necessarily building ammunition from scratch, this is a European country procuring a whole load of ammunition from around the world and then bringing it back to Europe and making sure that it is up to scratch. 1 million rounds had to go through, one presumes, Czech companies to be cleaned up, upgraded, whatever, made sure that it is working and safe to use by the Ukrainians. So that industrial output will have increased from a Czech point of view. We also hear that Rhyatal, the German concern, is to double 155mm production on site. So according to Rhyatal CEO Armin Papiga, the annual production capacity of the 155mm factory in Ukraine, which is still under construction, is to be doubled. By doing so, the Ukrainian government aims to be even less dependent on supplies from Western partners in the future. However, Rhyatal is still facing difficulties. So this is an article by German aid to Ukraine. The original plan was to have a final production capacity of 150,000 shells per year until Armin Papiga announced in an interview with Handelsblatt a few months ago that the plant currently under construction would be expanded again and the production capacity would be significantly increased. Until recently, no details have been made public, but now, around 4 months after the interview in Handelsblatt, a statement from the defence manager seems to shed some light on the matter. In Q2 2025, in a conference call which took place on the 7th of August, Papiga announced in response to a question that the Ukrainian officials want to double the planned production capacities. After a certain ramp-up period, which usually lasts 1 or 2 years, Rhyatal would then be in a position to annually produce 300,000 155mm shells in Ukraine. Excellent news for everyone involved, especially when it comes to supplying its own army with 155mm shells. The Ukrainian government has been almost exclusively reliant on deliveries from partner nations. The more that can be produced locally, the more independent Ukraine will be in the future. However, the Ukrainian government does not yet seem to be in a position to dream of even higher figures. According to PURL, they simply don't have the money. Rhyatal also seems to have another problem, the Ukrainian bureaucracy. PURL remarked several times during the conference that he was unhappy about the speed at which the project was progressing. In his opinion, the Ukrainian bureaucracy is responsible for this. He said that bureaucracy in Ukraine is unfortunately very, very high, and gave the example that construction of the new plants in Unterlüß and Ukraine began at almost the same time. In Germany, the construction is now completed, while in Ukraine, it is still not. Anyway, that is, I think, oftentimes going to be mentioned as an issue with Ukraine. There's more in the article from Germany to Ukraine. Please check it out at DEAID.org. In other words, GermanAidUkraine.org /news. Okay, let's move on. First batch of German reconnaissance drones called the Vector AI Quantum Systems makes them, with a new acoustic sensor to locate artillery fire, was handed over to the army of Ukraine, says Sarin here. And you can see the acoustic sensor on the front. This detects where artillery is being fired from, but can also detect small arms fire, as far as I understand. Max 25 says Quantum Systems has transferred to Ukraine a new modification of the Vector AI reconnaissance drone with the WASP acoustic sensor, which is capable of detecting artillery shots at a distance of 15 kilometers and small arms for up to 2.5 kilometers, useful for counter-battery fire, of course. Right, in Plovdiv in Bulgaria, and I think this is really significant, by the way, 3 Mi-24 attack helicopters were filmed yesterday being loaded onto a Ukrainian Antonov 124 AN-124 cargo plane. It's believed they will join Ukraine's army aviation fleet. So you can see them being loaded onto this plane. It's not hugely clear, but you can see them over there. 3 of them without their rotors, without the blades at the top, as you can see from this still of that video. Appears that Ukraine received a new package of at least 3 surplus Mi-24DV Hind helicopter gunships from Bulgaria. The trio was spotted loading on board a Ukrainian AN-124 Be Brave Like Butcher at Plovdiv airport. Okay, these helicopters are going to be super useful. They are being widely used to shoot down drones, these old Soviet attack helicopters. I don't know exactly which ones, but I've seen various ways that they're being shot down, various ways, machine guns of different types. So I saw a chain gun being used from one the other day that looked pretty mental. These are going to be so useful. They need way more of these to be operational right across the skies of Ukraine to help shoot down the drones, and also they can be used for close air support and other kind of attacking options, although I don't know if that's too much of a risk for these sorts of helicopters. So possibly being used as air defense is one of their is a better role for them. And now, if Russia continues to strike energy facilities related to Azerbaijan in Ukraine, Baku, so the capital of Azerbaijan, the government will begin to consider lifting the embargo on the supply of weapons to Ukraine that are in its arsenal. Media that's close to the Azerbaijani presidential administration have said. So there are sounds coming out of Azerbaijan that you keep bombing our gas pipeline infrastructure, say in Odessa on the Danube River area where that has taken place over the last week or so, then we will provide military aid to Ukraine. And we already understand that Azerbaijan has allocated $2 million in humanitarian aid for Ukraine after Russia bombed Azeri energy assets in Ukraine. President Aliyev condemned the deliberate airstrikes on an Azerbaijani state oil and gas compressor station in Odessa Oblast, pumping gas to Europe. Now, we're going to move slightly off Ukraine, but it's all kind of connected. There's been this move away from buying US equipment because the US have been so unreliable, have been so pro-Russian, and there are many countries who are worried if relations with the US sour, will they have kill switches in their, on their planes? Will will it become even more difficult to procure weapons or maintenance, so on and so forth. So Europe is looking to become more security independent and moving away from dependence on Russia. And actually now we're hearing that, I'll have to talk about that later. I've accidentally got this in the wrong order. But anyway, we hear that Spain and Switzerland have cancelled F-35 fighter jet orders. Trump has called it very unfair. Swiss leader Balthasar Gattli said, quote, "Those who hurl rocks at us in trade shouldn't expect gifts in return." And that is a super important point to make. They are losing some pretty lucrative deals going on here. And I think that is... I think there's a third country as well that might have also got cold feet in very recent days on F-35. So yeah, you're going to see, I think, more reliance on, as I say, European fighters, and there could be a stopgap of things like Eurofighter Typhoons, Gripens, things like that, while Europe waits to create one of their two versions of a sixth generation fighter, either the Tempest, which is Italy, UK, other nations, or you've got the Germany, France, Spain, is it FCAS? So there are two sixth generation fighters coming out of Europe. We hear that the British military have trained to launch FPV drones from the CH-47, the Chinook helicopter, which is a stalwart of the British helicopter fleet, but yet training to use drones innovatively and from as many places as possible. Then we hear that Hungary's government has kept secret that 2 weeks ago thieves broke into the Kecskemét military airfield and stole locator compartment parts from under the nose cones of retired Soviet-era MiG-29s. 19 jets are parked there. The serious incident was revealed by tabloid Blick. Now, that could either be Ukrainians trying to get hold of some of that stuff or Russians, because they both operate MiG-29s and parts will be fairly difficult to come by, or it's another nation that will end up moving those parts onto Ukraine or Russia. I don't know. This would be my speculation. I was on a plane this morning, overnight, coming back from holiday, and one of the films I watched was War Dogs with Jonah Hill and, I forget his name, which is a true story of procurement for the DoD from small-time and quite dodgy outfits. And it's a true story of these two kind of 20-something-year-old stoners who ended up setting up this company and sweeping up all these like smaller contracts to do with like bullets here or gas masks there, but actually making loads of money and doing things pretty dodgily. And it was a true story. It was a fascinating insight into procurement in the US, and I think a lot of those loopholes are now being closed as a result of that case. Now, Britain, this is what I should have said earlier, Britain has abandoned the idea, apparently, of sending a 30,000 strong contingent, that's a coalition of the willing, fighting force to Ukraine, according to the Times. Instead, London is offering to patrol the western skies of Ukraine with Typhoon and F-35 fighters, train the Ukrainian armed forces, demine the Black Sea and help rebuild the army. Now, this doesn't sound great. A lot of people are really claiming that the coalition of willing has ended up not achieving anything and is stepping back. The positive here is that actually air support would be really, really good. Having British or NATO or European fighter jets operating in Ukraine, shooting down drones and cruise missiles, possibly, really helping to be deterrents would be really useful. Of course, troops on the ground is super useful, but it's kind of necessary. But I do understand how difficult that is with nations just not wanting to send their troops into a war zone. Maybe thinking it'll be some kind of never-ending conflict again. It's a real challenge. I mean, realistically, you'd want US, NATO, European forces on the ground. The idea that we could contribute to a 30,000 strong force was looking quite good, as in there were quite a few nations that seem to be coming on board, but everyone has slightly different stipulations, I would have thought, and it's evidently become too challenging. That's really, really frustrating. But I certainly think, you know, unfortunately it shouldn't be either or, but it's not. It's just like, okay, we can't do the troops, but look, we can still do this. And then training of the armed forces, which they're already doing, of course, but that could be training, that will be training within Ukraine, demining the Black Sea, rebuilding the army. So, you know, hopefully, I mean, is that enough to deter Russia? Probably not. I think he needs much greater deterrence and unique contribution from the US. Now, actually, Trump has signaled today that the US could have something to do with some kind of security guarantee, but he's withheld from actually giving any detail on that. Anyway, moving on, Ukrainian defense firm, a couple of Ukraine indigenous manufacturing bits of news. Ukrainian defense firm Frontline has integrated a grenade launcher with an Estonian robotic platform. We are seeing so many hybrid bits of kit at the moment. Here's another one. Hopefully that can be effective enough to be used. Ukraine and Czechia will expand cooperation in weapons production, according to Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. He thanked Prague for the ammunition initiative under which Ukraine will receive 1.8 million artillery shells by the end of the year, while they've already given 1 million. So it's another 800,000 to go. That's really good, ahead of the game, evidently there. And for establishing a training centre for Ukrainian pilots, which they've done in Czechia as well. So fantastic there. But unfortunately, yeah, in October, Russophone oligarch Babis will most likely win the Czech elections. That is a huge challenge for Ukraine. And actually, I think it's a pretty big challenge for Europe as well, for the EU, sorry. Right, moving on to Russian news in terms of military aid or military innovation, production, etc. The war's biggest plot twist: China's fiber optic monopoly just neutralized Ukraine's tech edge. Russian drones can now strike 32 kilometers deep into Ukrainian positions completely unjammable, says Euromaidan Press. Now, this is nothing any of us don't already know, but it's useful sometimes, and I'm not really going to go into the article. You can go and read this at your own leisure. But it is important to understand that the Ukrainians really did have a drone advantage. There was an asymmetry there. They had more drones. The drones were better operated, and so on and so forth. And then suddenly the Russians eked their own advantage out by bringing fiber optics into play. And they have been the really big proponents of fiber optics. Ukraine were catching up. I don't know what the stats are at the moment, but it was a bit of a game changer. This development of fiber optic drones put Russia back in the driving seat to some degree, depending where you're looking on a battlefield. And the Ukrainians, while they are following suit, there is that asymmetry that pretty much still exists, I would have thought. Timothy Milovanov says Russia has sidelined Iran, making 90% of Shahed 136 drones at its Alabuga plant. CNN has said that Iran lost control of the final product. Russia added better comms, larger warheads, and longer battery life. So now Russia are making these Shahed drones pretty much independently. There are some elements of the Shahed drones that are still being delivered by Iran. I don't know if that's like necessary or like both and, as in it's not exclusive. So I would assume that Russia is able to make these drones completely without Iran, but does get some stuff from Iran still. The output now tops 5,500 a month, upgraded and cheaper, 70,000 now versus 200,000 back in 2022. So wow. Moscow blocked promised tech transfers to Iran and withheld payments to its drone supplier Sahara Thunder. Western Intel calls the Russian-Iran partnership transactional. Tehran supplied drones, missiles and tech. Moscow upgraded the design and is now cutting Iran out. In 2023, Russia and Iran signed a $1.75 billion deal to build Shahed drones in Russia. Moscow delivered the 6,000 units due in September 2025, a year early. It now builds engines, fuselages and electronics on site without Iranian components. Satellite images show Alabuga adding new production halls and dorms to raise output. Moscow plans to use this capacity to export upgraded Shaheds, possibly back to Iran after Israeli strikes damaged its drone plants. The arms trade continues despite tensions. Open source flight data shows a Russian Il-76 cargo plane flew into Tehran on July the 11th, stayed 3 hours and returned to Moscow. Iranian media said it carried final components of an S-400 air defense system. So there is that. And actually, I'm going to bring this piece of news, which I reported in Hits and Losses earlier today, into the conversation now, because a Russian ship moored at the Olya port in Astrakhan, I think it's actually called Olya 4, was struck by the Ukrainians and was loaded with components for Iranian Shahed drones, and that has sunk. So it looks like down at the bottom of the sea are now a lot of, well, actually it depends if that's as sinking as that gets, or whether it has sunk below the waterline now, and those components are hopefully, damaged beyond economical repair. So this seems to show that that Russia is still getting components for drones from Iran. Okay, the war zone has reported that Russia has upgraded its Iskander and KN-23 missiles. KN-23, the North Korean versions of the North Korean ballistic missile that Russia originally got. They weren't that good. They went wrong. They had a poor circle error probable, but actually they've been improved, and it's very difficult to tell the difference between an Iskander M and a KN-23 in terms of when they're hitting at night and or if they're going astray. You hear that basically that's either an Iskander M or a KN-23. But anyway, Russia has upgraded both of these missiles, making Patriot air defense systems less effective in shooting them down. The missiles are now said to carry radar decoys and can fly quasi-ballistic trajectories, combining ballistic flight with maneuvering to complicate interception. So, yeah, this is a challenge for the Ukrainians in this cat and mouse game of measure, countermeasure, measure, countermeasure. The Russians have been adapting their missiles, and they aren't just sitting by throwing men into meat assaults. They are definitely putting their industrial might behind a number of different things, and never write the Russians off, of course. Now, the Russians have created an Archangel interceptor drone to destroy drones, UAVs, and naval drones, so it can take out aerial drones and unmanned surface vehicles. It is claimed that the drone exists in 4 modifications, develops a speed of up to 350 kilometers an hour, and has a range of 50 kilometers, equipped with a warhead from 650 to 2,500 grams. And it looks very similar to some of the other drones we've seen. The German innovation in this sector, but Ukrainian drones looking very similar to that one. So it allows for vertical takeoff, and evidently is a good design of interceptor drone, since there are so many that fit that pattern. Right. Fabian Hoffman, a bit of a missile expert, says lack of velocity is a fundamental limitation of the interceptor drone concept. So we have just talked about interceptors. They're super important at the moment, but actually the Russians might have developed ways to avoid getting hit by interceptor drones. Times recently reported that the Russians are modernizing their Shahed drones, equipping them with AI modules and cameras for real-time information processing. So the Russians, discount them at your peril. They are certainly able to go toe-to-toe with the Ukrainians and do better than the Ukrainians in some really important sectors, as just Express, right. Russia's problems with fulfilling defense orders for the Kh-59 missiles are as follows. GUI data indicates that out of 116 enterprises involved in the production of these missiles, almost 50 companies are still not under sanctions. Even under such sanctions, Russia faces difficulty in fulfilling defense orders. The main reasons are a lack of domestic and foreign component base, limited production capacity and schedule disruptions. The situation is not saved by the cannibalism of the old systems. Russia is massively disassembling and adopting old P95 engines and homing head components. The department also notes that there have been cases of installing bulky mock-ups on Kh-39 missiles instead of active radar homing heads, which are the most expensive element of the missile and at the same time the main problem for Russian production. So there you go. It's not all pretty, but there isn't enough sanctions focus on some of these entities, that's for sure. Now, Japan has exposed a scheme to supply Sugami machine tools to the Russian military industry. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry has confirmed that more than 300 Sugami machine tools have disappeared after being sold to 7 Chinese companies. About 30 of these machine tools have already been found in Russia. That is really irritating and it's unacceptable, really. Something needs to be done about that. Now, as I quite often say, you understand why people do this, because money comes before morality in the corporate world. So they would try and find ways to get that equipment sold somewhere else. In fact, the film War Dogs was a very good insight into that, which is, they both had opinions about the Iraq War as it was then, until they started being able to make money out of it. And they're like, morality goes out the window, right? So, yeah, for many companies, they'll bend over backwards to continue doing trade with Russia. Now, North Korea plans to transfer another 6,000 troops and up to 100 pieces of equipment to Russia, including tanks, by the way, and APCs. According to the intelligence lead, Kirill Budanov. Now, we've heard so many different numbers as far as North Koreans are concerned. 15,000 originally, possibly another 5,000-6,000 thereafter, made up of scare quotes, deminers and reconstruction workers. And then there was some 25,000 people supposedly going to Yelabuga to learn the skills to make Shaheds and then go back to North Korea and make Shaheds for North Korea and Russia. And then we hear that possibly another 25 to 30,000 troops are going to be sent from North Korea to Russia to help, one would presume, in the kind of Kursk direction. But the question is whether they're going to be used into Ukrainian territory. Well, Budanov is now saying 6,000 troops. I don't know if that refers to the 6,000 of the previous kind of humanitarian deminers and reconstruction workers or what. So lots of numbers being thrown around. But also important to note, tanks and armoured personnel carriers. Now, previously, the North Koreans have given self-propelled guns, howitzers, and mortars. But if that's going to move to tanks and infantry fighting vehicles as well, then that is yet another challenge for the Ukrainians, because every time they get hold of a bit of kit or foreign soldiers, these are people or things that the Ukrainians have to destroy. So it's just prolonging the war even more. And it's a real challenge for the Ukrainians. It really, really is. Okay, that's enough from me. Totally appreciate your support. Thank you. Thanks for your patience while I was on holiday. I am back, but I probably need some sleep pretty soon. But yeah, thank you so much. You take care, and I'll speak to you soon.